All right. Um, Thank you all so much for joining us. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Dawn Rhodes, she, her. I'm the civic editor at City Bureau, and I oversee the Civic Reporting Fellowship program, working with our team to train emerging journalists in civic issues. I'm also joined today by Abena Bidiako, she, her, who completed our fellowship program in winter 2024. And also here with us is Ariel Chung, our editorial director, who's going to help moderate our chat and help us with our Q&A. And our operations coordinator, Shabaka Verna, and our fellowship manager, Lindsay Rice, are also here supporting us. So thank you all so much for joining us. I just want to give you just a quick overview of what to expect today. I'm going to go through a presentation to share a bit more about the fellowship and what you can expect from the program and the kind of work that our fellows have done in the past. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the application project or process, and share a few pointers of like what we're looking for in successful applicants. And then in between that, Abena is going to talk to you about her experience with the fellowship, what her crew worked on as part of their project, and a bit about what she's been up to since finishing the fellowship. Once we get through that presentation, we'll open it up for about 15 minutes of questions. And so at the bottom of your navigation bar, probably off to the right, you should see a box that says Q&A. So we'd love for you to use that box to submit your questions, which you can do anytime, but we'll let you know when we're getting close to questions that we're going to open it up. And so you can submit your questions there, and Ariel will help us navigate those, and we'll try to address those between myself, Abena, and Ariel if needed. So also when you finish, you can leave it, come and go at any time. If you have someplace to be, that's completely fine. When you leave the meeting, you should see a short survey pop up with a couple of questions asking for your feedback. We would really value any feedback that you have about whether or not this was helpful and how we can improve for the future. So with that, I am going to go ahead and get started the presentation. All right. All right. So we just want to start by giving you a viewpoint into what City Bureau is as an organization. Some of you may be more familiar with this than not, but City Bureau launched in 2015, and we had our co-founders had four main issues within local media that they wanted to address in our organization, which was inequitable, misrepresentative local reporting, lack of diverse perspectives in newsrooms, distrust of media within communities of color, and unsustainable media business models. So 10 years later, we're a Chicago-based organization. We're based in Bronzeville, Chicago-based national nonprofit that is reimagining local media. And the main things we focus on is how does it get made, who makes it, and how can it better reflect people's priorities and what they need. So we are also more than a newsroom. We are not a typical daily newsroom that you might see in Chicago. We're quite a bit more than that. And so imagine civic engagement, local and journalism, and civic training organization all kind of wrapped up into one. So what does that look like day to day? So City Bureau's work is kind of divided into three main buckets. So editorial is where the Civic Reporting Fellowship lives. So that is our main program. That is the program that we started City Bureau started with City Bureau back in 2015. And our editorial department also includes our full-time reporters who focus on community engagement and solutions reporting. We also have our documenters program. Many of you might be familiar with this, or you guys might be documenters, and this is our program where we pay people to cover public meetings. And we have this amazing resource and repository of notes from these public meetings going back years. Documenters is a national network, and so it's part of our mission to keep an eye on local government and to hold people accountable. And then we have our civic education and engagement arm. Some of you may also have come into contact with City Bureau through our public newsrooms, which is our free public workshop series. And we have been doing that for several years as well. But that also involves newer initiatives such as our Cook County digital equity. So you guys are here for the fellowship program, so I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Like I said, this was our first program when City Bureau launched. We have since trained over 160 people in engagement journalism centered on the South and West sides. Our program is 4 months long, and you learn a myriad of different things, which I'll get into in a bit more. But you, from reporting and writing to ethics and community building, how to pitch stories. There's quite a lot that we cover during that program. So here's kind of the TLDR of what this looks like. So it's a 16-week program for fall. It's August 25th to December 17th with normal national holidays in between. You receive the $6,000 stipend, 15 hours a week, and this is how your work breaks down week to week. Every Monday and Wednesday, you have a learning session with us, with me, some combination of me, Ariel, Lindsay, and our reporting lead lead these sessions around reporting, writing, community engagement techniques, fact checking, all kinds of different skills. You also have a weekly 3-hour team meeting with your team lead, who is an experienced reporter who is developing your reporting topic and helping to coach you week to week on how to pursue that. And then 8 additional hours per week that you divide up based on your schedule of reporting, research, editing, source building, and anything else that you need to do in order to develop your project. It's critical to understand that these sessions are mandatory. You can miss up to 4, but you'll have to make up that time. And there is no all remote option to participate. Our work is very community centered and focused on the South and West side. It's really important that in order to do that, you have to show up. You have to be present for that week after week. And also a big component of the fellowship is the teamwork. We choose 4 fellows, and we try to organize this around collective learning, where everybody is learning from each other and helping each other grow and benefiting from one another's skills. So it is important that you are present for that. So there's no all remote option to participate in the fellowship right now. So here's kind of an overview of what you learn. It's quite a lot. We pack a lot into the 16 weeks. Reporting and writing, for sure. Interviewing, source building is a big piece of this. We really emphasize a lot about the process of being in these communities, showing up, being present, talking to people, and helping them to understand what we do and earning their trust so that we can tell their stories in responsible ways. We talk a lot about information requests, data, editing process. All of any story that you do goes through several rounds of editing, fact checking. We take you through the publishing process, how to pitch stories, engagement work. And then towards the end, as we're wrapping up, we really want to set you up for success for whatever is next for you in the fellowship. So whether that is journalism or something else. And we spend the last 2 weeks of the fellowship focus a lot on career development and building those skills. So here's a little bit about what the specific reporting assignments are. Some of these are individual, some of these are in teams, some of them you would work on as a group, or you can do some of these assignments. Some of the assignments as a group. But the first one is a listening post. This is something that we don't publish. This is kind of like just to get your feet wet. And this is really about observational skills. And we ask you to go to a place that you are not familiar with, and rather than to start talking to people and building sources and things like that, we ask you to just be an observer. It's really important to just kind of, when you show up to a place, to get a vibe of it and to understand what are you seeing, what can you smell, what can you hear, and how much that can inform a story. So that's one of the first exercises that we do. The next one, then this is the first of your published pieces that you would do, is called a Vox Pop or Vox Populi, Voice of the People. And that is where you work in teams. We help you to conceptualize questions based on our reporting topic, and then you go out in teams to a certain part of a community and you ask people who are kind of just going about their day to talk to you about your topic, and you'll go through your questions. We come back, we assess our notes, and we develop a story based on that. Then The next one is a Q&A, which is somewhat similar to a Vox Pop, but this focuses on one specific person. So this could be like a community organizer, somebody of authority, somebody with expertise in the topic that you're talking about, and you interview them. And your published piece is kind of an edited version of your conversation with that person. And then finally, your feature story. This is the big project that you work on as part of the fellowship. And this is a deeply reported story that you pitch pretty early on. And then we are doing that work throughout most of the fellowship and helping you with the reporting throughout most of that. And it's a deeply reported story with several sources. We plan a lot of photography, data, potentially data, FOIA requests, things like that in order to put that together. So that's a longer piece that we'll publish at the end of your fellowship. Here's a bit of what some of our most recent cohorts have done. Lots of different topics. So most recently, our group in winter 2025 focused on youth housing and jobs. So we had some really interesting topics that conceptualized from that. We've also covered youth mental health. We covered that last year. We covered migrant day labor. That was a topic born out of the number of Venezuelans who were coming to Chicago, settling here and trying to build new lives here. So in the past, we've also covered affordable housing, reproductive access, elections, temporary workers, restorative justice. So quite a lot. And that also includes some resource guides, zines, and other engagement work that we have built as part of that. For the fall, our reporting topic isn't determined yet. We're still conceptualizing that, doing some pre-reporting on that, but we do know it's going to focus on intergenerational relationships between youths and elders. So that's something that you can look forward to. And then here's kind of a look of what our previous fellows are up to now. A lot of that is within journalism or journalism adjacent. As reporters, as editors, fact checkers, audience engagement experts, things like that. Some people are not in journalism anymore. They are working for nonprofit and advocacy, community organizing, things like that. They have launched some of their own businesses and organizations. Actually, one of our fellows from fall last year, so just this most recent fall, just launched her own newsroom, also in partnership with our civic engagement arm or civic education arm, which is really exciting. So speaking of, I'm going to turn it over to Abhina. Like I mentioned, Abhina was one of our fellows in winter 2024, and that was the group that focused on migrant day labor. So Abhina, thank you so much for joining us. I'd love for you to talk more about your experience with the fellowship and what you gained from it and where you're at now.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dawn, Ariel, Baka. Thanks all of you guys for asking me to do this. Honestly, this is really a huge honor. I owe the City Bureau a lot. Since they really got me together. So like Dawn was saying, my name's Abena Bidiako. I was a fellow for winter 2024. And we covered migrant day labor. That was what our cohort focused on. Considering the influx of recent arrivals that arrived to Chicago during all that stuff that was happening in the world. I'm sure you guys are well aware of. So I wanted to do the fellowship. I heard about it from Grace, she's a documenter. I met her at DePaul. We were at 14 East together, and she was telling me about how City Bureau Fellowship was great. It could be something that I could definitely get into right after I'm done with school. It's a nice leeway into, what I've done as a student reporter and student media versus, coming into the real world. So I saw the application, I applied. I honestly didn't think I would get it. I'm really glad that I did. But that was sort of that was sort of about my introduction with it. I have a bachelor's in English from University of Missouri and a master's in journalism at DePaul. Yes, Grace is incredible. Sorry. Just wanted to throw that in there. Yeah, so uh, while I was there, like I said, we covered we focused on the recent arrivals, the migrant day labor, and it was a very, um, how do I say this? I don't want to say jarring experience, but it definitely was an experience that I wasn't prepared for, right? I had I had researched what, past fellows had did, so I knew civic reporting and engagement reporting would be a part of it. But considering what we were covering, this topic, having to talk to Venezuelans that came from really, really tragic and traumatic conditions, and they came here to America, to Chicago, just so they can start a better life for themselves and their families. That was definitely something that um took a minute to get used to, because they trusted us with these stories, with their it's a very vulnerable population, and they trusted us to tell their stories with the correct amount of respect and dignity and integrity and accuracy. So me just constantly, myself and my fellows, we always had to keep that in our minds, that this is very, very sensitive information that these people are trusting us with. And we need to be very critical about how we deliver this information to the public. One of the biggest things that we knew about this topic was that there was a lot of misconceptions circulating in the city of Chicago, a lot of misconceptions circulating in the media too. We kept on hearing from people saying, they came here and they've been getting all this money, and they're putting them up in housing, and they're offering them all these, opportunities that they never gave us, that we've been here struggling with. And we thought to ourselves, huh, that actually is a valid argument. I see why they're upset. So what that caused us to do a little bit more digging. Where are these resources coming from? How is the city and the state providing these funds? And this money, these housing, all this stuff to help them and set them up for better lives. But as we did more digging, as we talked with recent arrivals, because when I tell you we spent a lot of time in shelters, like camped out inside of shelters, we really did that. Um, as we talked with them and heard their stories, we realized that was one of the biggest misconceptions that was circulating in the city, that they were well off. They were, automatically put up in housing. They were automatically given jobs, all this stuff. That's not true. And that's what we really wanted to focus on. We wanted to tell the real story about what they were actually going with, but we also wanted people to understand where they were coming from, because we realized that in the media, there wasn't a lot of conversation about what was happening in Venezuela that caused them to come here, or in Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, wherever they were coming from. So that is what we really wanted to integrate it in all of our stories. So not only were we focusing on the day labor aspect of how you have all these migrants at outside of Home Depots, and they're taken to these day labor jobs, and then they're just mistreated. They're not being paid for. Some of them are even kidnapped. We wanted that to be important, but we also wanted people to have more information about the background of where they came from and why they came here. What was the purpose behind it? My final story focused on haircuts, tattoos, and this Venezuelan punch that one of my sources made. So like I said, we were focusing on the labor aspect. And while we knew they were granted temporary status and work permits, a lot of them they didn't receive those like in a timely manner. It took a minute for them to get those TPS permits and all that stuff. So or they were working day labor jobs, and they weren't actually given fair wages or wages at all. So a lot of them started, taking to entrepreneur work. They started doing things that they used to do back at home and just bringing them here. So I talked to a tattoo artist who started up his own business. He used to run a shop when he was in Venezuela before he fled here with his family. Um, that was really that was a great conversation, to just one, hear about his journey coming here, and then also seeing his skills, and how he's already cultivated a sense of community and built a pretty decent clientele for himself, in order to be able to support his wife, his baby, and his wife had another baby, but she was pregnant at the time. So yeah, two kids. I also talked to another source. His name is Ronnie. Like I said, he made this Venezuelan punch that was really popular back at home. And it was like, sort of like a punch, but like slushy sort of infusion. It was actually very delicious. That's neither here nor there. But so I wanted to talk to him about that, the process and how he was going around the city and selling it. And his whole thing was that he wanted to be like, he said, I wanted to be like the Mexicans in the little village and how they have, they have like corn stands and I want to sell my product like they do. And I'm like, see, he has a vision. He's an entrepreneur. He sees it and he wants it. Last haircuts, Dennis, he was a barber back at home and he started cutting hairs for, people at the shelters. If they could throw him a little money here and there, he would, you know, collect whatever he could to support himself so he can send back home to his mom who was still there. So, yeah, the main purpose of what we wanted to really focus on was being able to, share these stories with the care that they deserve, but also recognizing that we're embedded now in a community. We now are building these relationships with, our sources and our subjects. And we wanted to be able to honor that in the best way possible while also being fair and balanced and showing every side of the story. And it was a incredibly enriching experience, and it taught me a lot about community engagement, community reporting, investigating, and just, always trying to keep that human component within your pieces, especially when you're dealing with topics about vulnerable people. I think that that novelty is really important when you are doing, civic engagement reporting such as this, and or any other topic that you might cover with your fellowship. It's just really, really important to always keep that human component around. So yeah, I will be around for. Am I doing questions now or later?
Later, but
Okay.
thank you, thank you so
Yeah.
much. So, Michael, I see your question. We will get to that, but thank you so much. I'm gonna really appreciate that. But so I have a few other things that I'd like to share with you, but we're going to get to questions in about 6 or 7 minutes. So please, now would be a good time if you have questions that you haven't submitted to use the Q&A box to submit that, and we will start answering those very soon. Thank you very much. So a bit about the application. If you have not yet applied, just a few tips to help you out there. So our biggest tip is to try to be concise and to keep your answers relatively brief. You'll see on the application there's a suggested word count. Don't fret if it's like a little bit over or a little bit under. We're not That's not really the purpose of it. It's really to give you just a guide of kind of what we're looking for. So if, for example, the box says, suggested 300 words and you have 1,000, try to edit that down so that it's a little bit shorter. We do ask about your previous experience in journalism and reporting, but we don't want you to think that that is a requirement. We are very clear. This is a training program. This is for emerging journalists. We have trained and do train people who have no experience and background in journalism. So that it's not a disqualifying question. We really just want to know what your background is so that if you are accepted into the program, we can make sure that we're meeting you where you're at and that the training makes sense for you, depending on what your background is. Um, and don't gloss over the our question about your community work or any connection that you have to the South and West Side. This is really important for us because these are the communities that we focus on. And I know I say South and West Side, there are many communities and neighborhoods within that, obviously, but that is where we focus. And we really do want to hear from you about, any kind of whether you grew up there, if you grew up going to like a relative's house there or something along those lines, if you grew up spending time there, anything like that, any kind of organizing, any involvement that you have that gives you some more familiarity with those neighborhoods, we want to hear about all of that. And then, yeah, like we are journalists here, and so we love a story. So instead of just describing to us your experience, if you have a story from your life that helps to give us some insight into whatever your connection to the South and West Side is, or what your journalism background is, tell us a story. We would love to see it. We would love to. That's a great way to help us get to know you better. One a really important, maybe the most important section on the application is where we ask you to pitch stories. I want to make it clear that these stories that you would include as a story pitch are not what we are. We're not looking for these because this is what you are going to be reporting on if you are accepted into the fellowship. This is really an exercise to help us assess how you identify stories, how you think of that process, how you do research, what and if you were to pursue that story, how would you go about it? So, few tips that I just want to make sure that you're paying attention to as you're thinking through that. So, story versus a topic. So, what do I mean by that? A topic is very general, and you could report on that for years. So, a topic would be something like, environmental injustice on the South Side. Well, what does that mean? That could mean a myriad of different things. You could spend decades. People do spend decades reporting on something like that. A story is a specific thing or issue that is happening now that connects to environmental injustice. So, for example, like if for example there is a major polluter that is setting up shop in the South Side and the community is organizing to try to block that, that is a story. That's a specific thing that's happening now that connects to this larger issue. So try to pay attention to that distinction. Same thing here. Answer, not a question. So a question would be something like how, or a question based pitch would be something along the lines of how are Chicago's immigrant communities responding to ICE raids or the threat of ICE raids? What we want you to try to do is push past that question and do more research to try to get at the answer. Like, how are they doing this? So a good starting point for a story would be something along the lines of um, a particular community or a particular community group or maybe a coalition of community groups are organizing to give immigrant communities information, resources, contacts for any kind of legal assistance and things like that so that they are prepared for if ICE were to show up in their communities. And then that's the starting point to your story. And then your story would maybe dive into the specifics of how they do that. So not the question, but the answer. I mentioned research, so read up on like how on local Chicago media, Block Club, Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, the WBEZ, WTTW, the local TV stations, Tribe, Southside Weekly, Borderless. There's so many really fantastic um, really fantastic media organizations that cover a lot wide swath of information in Chicago. So read up and check through Google News to make sure that your story hasn't been covered yet. Um, Also, do your research on us. I told you we've been around for 10 years. We've reported on a lot of different issues. Make sure that this is something that we have not covered before, and make sure that this is something that seems to fit with what our mission and our vision is as an organization and the stories that we've done in the past. If you kind of stumble upon a story idea and it has been done before, think about what's another aspect to it that has not been explored. That's okay. You can do that. Um, and then maybe include a little bit about how would you go about reporting this? What would be your process? Like, who are some potential sources that you would talk to? Where would you go and look for data to help support this? Or what research would you do? Tell us a little bit about like how would you do this if you did actually have to report this story? And the big things that I sometimes see people stumble over is tell us why this story is needed right now. What is happening in this exact moment now that is making this story necessary, as opposed to a story that you could conceivably do a year in the future or 6 months in the future. What's happening now and what's new that really makes this a story that people need to read and people can benefit from now. And then think about like how this connects to larger issues as well. So, if region, we cover Chicago, we cover specific parts of Chicago, but think about, how this issue is playing out in Chicago, in Illinois, regionally, nationally, globally. That's always a good thing. So that's a lot to hold. So a little bit more on kind of what I mean by that. So topic versus a story. So topic is very general, like I said, and it's unexplored, and it could mean a lot of different things. So like ending animal cruelty in Chicago. Well, what kind of animal cruelty? What kinds of animals in what sector of like what does that mean? And then you can see on the right Here's a potential story idea. This former circus worker is campaigning to end animal cruelty. Okay, now I'm locked in. Now I know that we're talking about animal cruelty specifically within the context of how animals are treated in circuses. Now I have some conflict here because this is somebody who has an inside view of how this plays out and has now made a change in their life to campaign against this. So now I'm locked in. That's the difference between a topic and a story. The Hairdressers of America Summit. That's just an event. So what is the story? There could be lots of different stories within that versus the Hairdressers of America are meeting for the first time since the grand dame of their craft was implicated in a corruption ring last year. Now I'm seated. Now I'm ready to go. Now I understand I have a character, I have a conflict, I understand why this event is important and I know what I'm looking for. So that's a little bit more of a distinction. So questions versus answers. Here's a little bit of what that looks like. So CPS is closing 4 schools in Englewood. Who is affected by that? Where will students go? Is this different from the last time Chicago closed schools? All valid questions. Let's try to push past that question and let's get to an answer a little bit here. So here's how that pitch could go. And this is something that requires research. This is something that requires some source building, right? So as CPS closes schools at one of the fastest rates of all major US cities, families such as the farmers in Englewood have ushered their kids through 2 or 3 high schools each. I'll interview the farmer kids and their cousins to examine the impact it's had on them. Now I see a story because now I see we are examining this larger issue of CPS closing schools in this neighborhood through the lens of this one particular family. And now I see a reporting plan. I see why this is timely. So that's the difference is like we're getting at the impact of this, not questioning what the impact is. So hopefully you can start to see the difference there.
Don, we do have some
Yeah,
questions about
sure.
pitches.
Yeah,
If you'd like me to pause here for it.
sure.
There are a couple in the Q&A field that I have answered, but I do just kind of want to touch on them.
Yeah.
And I'm only going to focus on the ones that are about story pitches right now. I know there are a few others that I've answered, but we'll circle back to those at the end. Um, Zoe asked that the mentioned that the fall fellowship topic will be intergenerational relationships between youth and elders. Should our pitch or any other parts of our application address this? Your pitch does not need to be related to the fellowship topic. Right now, we're just trying to get a feel for your understanding of what makes a good news article. If you want to address kind of your community connections, any work you've done that's related to that topic, to that beat topic, you can, but we are not judging applications based on how well you understand the beat topic. We know everyone's going to be coming into it with different levels of experience, and it's something that we, as a staff, are also exploring. So we don't come into reporting with every answer. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to do any interviews or research. So it's not something we expect you to be experts on from the beginning. We also had a question of if you are allowed to include videos about a topic you're passionate about and would love to gain more exposure for it via City Bureau. You can link to videos if you want, but that is pretty unusual for a story pitch in a typical situation where you as a reporter are pitching a story. Also keep in mind that in your application, these pitches are not tied to what you're going to be covering for City Bureau. Again, it's just a way for us to get a feel for your understanding of what makes a newsworthy article and how you would approach it. Um, there was also a question about whether it would be beneficial for us to explain our research process leading into our pitches or just include the pitches themselves as our answers. I think it's helpful to include a line or two, like let's say, in my work as a policy analyst, I found XYZ. So I think my pitch would be focused on that issue, XYZ. But I don't think you need to get too in depth about it. You don't need to link anything for us. You don't need to like write the article. This is really going to be a couple of paragraphs explaining, here's a pitch and here's how I would approach it. I think Don is going to go into an example of that next. Those are all of the pitching related questions. Um,
Yeah, and
we'll,
in the spirit of kind of keeping it brief, we're looking for 1 or 2 paragraphs here.
yeah,
So
here's an example. I know there are a few other questions. We'll circle back to those, but I'm going to turn it back over to Don. Thanks, Don.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're looking for 1 or 2 paragraphs here. So That's really the idea. So you don't need, we're not asking you to write through the whole thing. We don't need an essay. One or two paragraphs can cover it. So here's kind of an example of how a recent fellow, Alonso Vidal, did this. So part of the reason this works for me is because I see, like in that first paragraph, I can see one, I can see timeliness. We're talking about like Trump 2.0. I can see the issue, how Latinx communities are preparing to help undocumented community members by spreading information. I see a thing that is happening right now in response to this moment. I also see a specific source and a specific person who is doing this work. And so this may not be the only person we talk to for a story like this, but like at least this is where we're starting. I see that they are, they're based in Pilsen. They're based in a community that we cover. I also get a sense from the reporter here, like how they would report the story if we were to have them do this. And I see that, so this is answering a question rather than speculating on how groups are responding in this moment. So like I said, it doesn't need to be perfect. You're not doing this story, but we just want to, this helps us to start to evaluate like how you think about these ideas, how familiar are you with some of the issues that our communities are tackling, and what could be a potential story idea that you would go through. So um that's all I have for now. So I would love to hear more of your questions. What else can me, Ariel, Abena, what else can we tell you that would help you learn more, help you understand more about the program, the application, whatever you'd like.
I'm going to run through the written questions that we have. There are a few that I've already answered, but I'm just going to recap them for anyone who's not reading. Feel free to send them in. You can also send them anonymously, or you can send them in the chat just to the hosts and panelists right now. So, how many fellowship spots are available? We have 4 fellows per cycle, and currently we have 3 cycles per year. So that means we train 12 fellows each year. Will that change in 2026? Potentially, but we don't have that determined yet. I would say probably by October-ish, we should be kind of firming up our 2026 cycles. How does City Bureau decide on the cohort's reporting topic? So as a newsroom, we have 4 large focus areas that we cover. Those are justice and democracy, vitality, which are things like housing, education and work, wellness, and community. From there, we meet as a team and discuss what coverage needs we've heard from the community. And once we're kind of coming to a consensus on something, for example, for Abena's cohort, we knew we wanted to cover migrants as there were the influx of Venezuelan migrants coming in from Texas. So once we knew we wanted to do something about migrants, then our team leader spent about 3 weeks to a month doing pre-interviews with community members and organizations to hone in on the specific beat topic. So for Abena's cohort, we just kept hearing over and over again, like, we want to know how to get work. We want to know about employment opportunities. We want to know about jobs. So that was how we then honed in on migrant labor as the topic. Are most of your fellows people who grew up in Chicago? I'd say we have a pretty wide range. Many have grown up in Chicago. Some have come to the city more recently. We do ask in the application to talk about your connections or experience with South and West Side communities. So if you grew up there, then that's a pretty solid connection. But there are also a lot of other ways to connect with community. Uh, Dates for the spring cohort. The fall cycle, which is our next cycle, runs August 25th to December 17th. We do not have dates yet for spring 2026, but again, I would say like roughly by October, we should have those dates up, and those would be on our website. However, applications for the fellowship are always open on a rolling basis. And when we're coming to the beginning of each fellowship cohort, we take a look and see who has applied. We follow up with them and say, like, hello, we want to confirm your interest for the upcoming cycle. Here are the dates. And also, if you'd like to update your application, if you've been doing some things since you set it in, you can submit an updated application. Uh, what are the acceptance rates for the fellowship? I don't have an exact number on that, but I will say that we do get a lot of applicants for a small number of roles. And that's something that we are trying to look into a little bit more as a staff of how we can better serve such a large pool of applicants. I will say that there are multiple fellows who have been accepted after applying for a couple cycles. Since we have such a large number, I think we usually get about 50 to 60 applicants per session. Um, Sometimes it comes down to, very minute differences in applications, and someone who might have missed out on one cycle might be taken in, the very next cycle. So, we are always happy to give feedback on applications. We are always happy to offer suggestions. One area we do often look for is whether someone has been a documenter, because that does sort of show us that they have a good idea of what City Bureau does. They have some news gathering experience, and that is sometimes something that can make the difference between making it into a cycle and not. Do we require fellows to be citizens of the United States? I don't believe we require people to be citizens, but you do have to be able to work legally in the US. That's something that I'm happy to follow up on with more specificity, if that is something that you need more details on. Um, so please feel free to reach out to us one-on-one if that's something to consider. You can always apply and then we can get into the finer details of that as well. Or just reach out to us personally and I'll get the specific answers on that. I'd like to apply, but we'll be traveling out of the country during the tail end of the 2025 cohort and would miss 4 required sessions. Um, I would recommend you, I would recommend submitting an application. But I would just note those absences and then also say that if you are, say that you're interested in upcoming cycles as well. And then we'll have your application on file. We'll follow up with you when the next cycles come around. Missing 4 sessions at the tail end would be really hard. And we do specifically say that 4 is the maximum number you can miss. So that could be really hard, especially as you're trying to finish up your feature article. We wouldn't want you to not be able to complete the work because of that time conflict. If you,
One quick
sorry.
thing, if I could, because I see a couple of questions about this, and I had another slide about this really quickly. So, because I see a couple of people asking about like what happens after you apply. So, just a bit of on the timeline. Our applications are due July, end of day July 21. And as Ariel mentioned, we'll post the 2026 dates for the 2026 cycles later this year, but you can apply anytime and indicate that you're interested in 2026. We'll start moving people into the final, choosing finalists late this month. You'll find out from us one way or the other whether you are moving on to an interview stage or not. And then you'll also have an opportunity to ask us for any feedback on your application, which we can do one-on-one. And if you are contacted for an interview, you'll get a scheduling link to be interviewed by me, Ariel, Lindsay, or Siri, who is our reporting lead. We work as a team to choose the cohort and to split up the interviews and to give each other insights about the applications. We work together as a team to review the applications also. And you'll also receive, if you are chosen for an interview, you'll also receive instructions for a writing test. And again, that's not a make or break thing. That's mostly just for us to assess where you're at so that we can make sure that we are adjusting the training to help you and to meet you where you're at. And yeah, like I said, it's a pretty competitive program. We are trying to figure out how to scale up a little bit, but really the people that you see on this call we are the team. So there's only so many of us. And we also don't want to bring in more fellows than we can reasonably train properly because it's really important that you're getting individual attention as well as attention as a group. So this is the capacity that we have, that we accept 4 people into our cycles each year. And so it is competitive. So it's very hard to apply for something and to not get accepted. I realize that that's difficult, and these are always difficult decisions. please try not to take it personally. We do frequently have had fellows who have applied in previous sessions or who were not accepted, and we did accept them for a future one just because their skills were a better match for what we were covering, or were a better match for the team that we were putting together. So we always keep good candidates in mind. So please try not to take it personally if this is not the cycle that you are accepted into. And then yes, please, if you are not already a documenter, not already signed up to do the trainings, please consider that as a way to stay connected with City Bureau. Documenters is a really wonderful program. You gain a lot of really fantastic skills and understanding about civic issues in the city. So yeah, Ariel mentioned like we're often choosing at the end, we're often choosing among quite a few people who we think would be a good fit for the program. And so we just have to make decisions about who is the best fit for right now and for the team that we are trying to put together so we can really focus on collective learning and growing for a part of that. Um, Other questions that we haven't gotten to yet, Ariel? Anything else that we can
Yeah,
address?
couple things that I've answered in the Q&A, but we'll add here. If we run into questions, what should we do? You can reach out to Dawn or myself, Dawn at citybureau.org, Ariel at citybureau.org, nice and easy. No one needs to try and spell my last name. Any sense of what the spring topic will be? We typically work on our beat plans for the following year in the late fall. So no. Are you able to be a fellow and a documenter at the same time? Absolutely. We've had that happen many, many times. Regarding applying again, should we know if we have applied before and address specifically anything that's changed since then? That is definitely helpful to let us know. Like maybe you've completed another internship or maybe you've done, some other project. So yes, definitely let us know what's new. Noticed that people in photos are in their 20s. A lot of our population is over 65. Can we consider older applicants? We absolutely do consider and have accepted applicants across a wide range of ages. Um, we've had people really, I'd say all over the
Mhm.
place.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
are fellows expected/allowed to have jobs outside of the fellowship? This is a part-time fellowship, so we come into it with the understanding that, everyone needs to make a living, everyone needs to pay their bills. Most people do have jobs outside of the fellowship. I will say that a couple areas that we have noticed are people who have full-time jobs that are very demanding and will typically go over 40 hours a week might find it challenging to also put in the time for this fellowship. That is a lot of work. This fellowship is a lot of work. There are some cohorts that sometimes are going beyond those 15 hours. Abena, looking at you. And we do try and make sure that you are dedicating the appropriate amount of time to this fellowship so that you are not overwhelmed. Another example is people who are full-time college students can sometimes find that balance of school and this fellowship very difficult because school also comes with homework, studying, exams. There's a lot more that goes into it than clocking into a 9 to 5. So we do sometimes say that full-time students are going to have a hard time balancing the fellowship. Um, Question to Abena about your feature article and
Oh,
covering the barber, tattoo artist, and the punch. Given everything that was happening to migrants and the conditions that they were living in, what drew you to that topic?
yeah. That's a really good question. Thank you. So, honestly, like I was saying, that we were covering labor. That was what we were focusing on. Even actually before we decided to hone in on labor, we focused on like sort of, I think it was three main issues that were popping up within the migrant community, which was housing, labor, and I think childcare was the third one. I have to go back to my notes. I'm not entirely sure. But everything always came back to jobs, like a lack of job, a lack of work permits, not finding substantial work. And what I was struck with was that, okay, and instead of focusing on the day labor aspect of, seeing a lot of migrants outside of Home Depots or wherever that they're getting, quick quick jobs, to just to get through the day. I thought it was really interesting to know the entrepreneurial skills. Specifically, what really drew my attention was seeing women and sometimes men, like on the highway or the street, like on the busy streets in the city where they're just like they're selling candy or water or pop or fruits or anything like that. And I was thinking to myself, this is them trying to find work because they're not able to get work at, jobs that are provided here by the city. So I wanted to dive a little bit more deeper into that and find more, I guess, nuanced stories that personally nuanced stories that are entrepreneurs creating their own work, but it's not the typical jobs that we're constantly seeing on the street. Not saying that those aren't as important to report on, they absolutely are, but I was just fortunate enough that the sort of connections we were making with people in shelters, but also advocates who were talking with people in the shelters, they were telling me about, hey, there's this guy I know who's been cutting hair, or there's this woman I know that's actually started her own salon. I wanted to talk to her, but that was when it was really difficult because she had like her own beauty salon inside of the Pilsen shelter. She was doing nails, she was doing hair, she was doing it all. Um, I had another advocate source that was telling me that she met a guy who started doing tattoos, because he was covered in ink, and she asked him, "Did you do these yourself?" And he was like, "Yeah, this is my work. This is what I do." So that was one aspect. And then Ronnie sort of just like fell into my lap. I'm trying to remember how I connected with him, but I believe it was within the same avenue of us talking to someone who was an advocate for the migrant community, and putting me in touch with another person that they know is like trying to make work on their own without, having to deal with regular day labor jobs. So I thought that those were just some really interesting topics. And I thought that those were really unique ways of people trying to use previous skills that they had back at home and, bringing them here and making a life for themselves. So I think that's kind of why I honed in on those three professions. I just thought they were, especially after I heard their background stories of where they came from and how they traveled here, I was more compelled to tell their stories because it was very, again, very, very moving stories to share.
Um, I want to be mindful of the time. We'll keep the room open for a couple more minutes, so we have a room for maybe one or two more questions. Ariel, if there's any specifically for Avana, just because Avana has a little bit of a hard out, can we prioritize that?
Yeah, I don't think we have any more for Abena
Okay.
specifically. I do
Okay.
want to touch on the question from Jane about the story pitching process. I
Sure.
think you asked this when we were talking about the fellowship story pitching versus the
Yeah.
application pitching. So story pitching, we go through a process where people can pitch the stories that they're thinking of in a draft mode, and then we go around in a group session and everyone shares their pitches. We all offer feedback, fellows offer feedback and thoughts and insights and clarifying questions, and then we refine them. A lot of times people will book one-on-one sessions either with Dawn or Lindsay, myself, or our team leader, who's Siri Chilukuri, and just kind of talk through like, here's how this story's looking, here's what some of the pitfalls might be, here are the sources that might come up, and then we finalize the pitches, and then we move into an outline process from there as people are getting their interviews underway. Um, Ava, I think we got your question about the application process after applications are submitted. But if there's anything else specifically you're wondering, let us know. Otherwise, I think we've hit all of the questions. Um, but we've got a
Okay.
few more minutes if anyone has anything else.
Awesome. If anybody has any other questions, we have a couple more minutes to address those. But if you are good to go, if you're free to hop off at your own time, thank you very, very much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. When you log off, you should see a short survey pop up on your screen. It's just two quick questions and then like a comment box. We really value feedback at City Bureau, and this is the first time I am doing this. So please, please tell me how this helped you, if at all, and leave us any suggestions about how we can do this, organize this any differently in the future. That would be helpful. We'd love to get that. But thank you all so much for being here. We are really excited to see such a big crowd. Really hope that if this is a good fit for you, please do apply. Please reach out to me, reach out to Ariel. If you have any other questions that come up after we log off here today. But thank you very, very much. But we'll keep the room open for a couple more minutes in case you have any other questions. But thank you otherwise. And have a good rest of your day. Stay safe. And we look forward to seeing you guys apply. Thank you.
The person who asked if we applied already, can we get feedback on our last applications before we resubmit? Yes, absolutely. Just reach out to Dawn or I. Let us know who you are so we can give you your application feedback, and we will get that to you as quickly as we can.
And I know that you have to hop off pretty soon.
Yeah.
So yeah, so go, no, that's
Thank
right.
you
But thank
guys.
you very, very
Great to
much for
see
your
you.
time. We really appreciate it. So
Of
yeah, you can hop
course.
off.
It was good seeing you guys too.
Thank you so
Talk to
much.
Yeah.
You as well. Appreciate you.
Thanks. Bye.
Seems like we're good to go.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm gonna thank you all very much. Appreciate you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.